Hello, everyone. We are so happy to be here in our webinar about the impact of the US election on the Latino community in the US and abroad. We have first-class speakers, and I am sure we will have a great time together today. My name is Beatriz Martorello. I am Buen President, a nonprofit organization that we formed in 2011 focused on empowering women. We connect Latina professionals around the world, and we collaborate with each other to advance personally and professionally. I founded this nonprofit organization because I really believe in the importance of collaboration, of networks, of connectivity. I really believe that we need to get together and learn from each other. Today, we will have a dialogue about different topics that are essential to understand the impact of the new administration on the Latino community. I moved to the US several years ago from Argentina, a beautiful country that I love, but that was totally changed in the last decades due to the government and their policies. My country suffered a lot as a product of some policies, and the life of the population dramatically changed, and my life changed. I'm in my new country now, US. I love this country, and I see a lot of challenge for our community. I think that is a great moment for us to really try to pursue unity and collaboration among Latinos. We will have today a great discussion to see where our country is going. I want to thank really deeply to Carlos Gonzalez from CG Media Solution for helping us with the virtual production of this event. Thank you, Carlos. And big thanks, big gratitude to all the speakers, great speakers, because today they will share their knowledge and their time with us. Now, I will introduce each speaker, and then we will start our dialogue. Rosana Rosado. Thank you, Rosana, for joining us. We know that you are super busy. Rosana Rosado has served as Secretary of State of New York since June 2016. From her award-winning 30-year media career to her service in New York City government, she brings a wealth of experience and insight to her role. Her boundless energy and creativity, combined with her expertise in Latino affairs, has proven to be a great asset to all New Yorkers. Under her leadership, Secretary Rosado has helped make the Department of State one of the most dynamic agencies in a state government. Now I will introduce Dr. Benjamin Gedan. Benjamin is the Deputy Director of the Wilson Center's Latin American Program and the Director of the Argentina Program. He is Associate Professor of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, former South America Director on the National Security Council at the White House during the Obama administration. Thank you, Benjamin. Alberto Coll. Dr. Alberto Coll currently serves as Director of European Union and Latin American Legal Studies and Professor of Law and U.S. Foreign Relations at DePaul University Law School. He previously served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and he holds a GD and a PhD in International Politics from the University of Virginia. Gracias, Alberto. Maria Peña. Maria is a 30-year career bilingual journalist covering the Hispanic community in the US and issues impacting Latin America. She's a media strategist in the Library of Congress, working to promote the spread of culture and knowledge to worldwide audiences. Her work has taken her to the halls of power in the US and the slums in Latin America, and has gotten recognition from influential Hispanic organizations. Gracias, Maria. Francisco Sanchez. Francisco is an attorney at Holland & Knight who focuses his practice on trade policy, regulation, and the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States process, including mitigation measures. Mr. Sanchez serves as the U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce for Trade during the Obama administration and has a long and distinguished career in the public and private sectors. Thank you, Francisco. Ruben Diocesán. Ruben is a media and communications executive with over 30 years of experience in print and digital media, broadcasting, and journalism. He currently serves as the Vice President of Content for Telemundo NBC Universal. His previous roles include executive editor of La Opinión newspaper in Los Angeles and publisher of La Raza newspaper in Chicago. He holds a master's degree in development management from American University. And now we start with our first question. And we will have a dialogue between among all the speakers, and then you can also write your questions there in YouTube, and Carlos will help with us when we finish our conversation. First question: how do you think the Latina community will be impacted during the first years of the Biden administration? Rosana?
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure who was going first. Thank you. First of all, thank you for including me. I think it's a great moment to talk about the impact of this administration and also of all the changes going on in this country on Latinos specifically and Latinas especially. So I think rather than how it will be impacted, I like to say how it should be impacted. And that is that Latinas in the United States across the age spectrum should benefit from this administration because they put their heart and soul into putting this administration in power. And so I like to say that I think there's a lot of hope, notwithstanding all of the positive news this week on the economic front. I think that's important. I think stabilizing communities is important. But two issues I think are key. And one is what the Biden administration is ready to do and how quickly they can deal with the migrant children, the children who are detained. I think that is a very important issue for all women, but especially for Latinas. And secondly, that to the extent that they can be successful in battling COVID, because we as a community have been greatly affected by this pandemic. And so Latinas as head of household, as women, in many cases who are caring for older people and younger people, have been deeply impacted, both on an economic level, on an emotional level, and social level, by the pandemic. So to the extent that this administration can be successful, and so far we have very positive signs, that will directly impact Latinas in general.
And I think I want to jump in here and say that what Rosana just said is very important, because we got to remember that before the pandemic, Latinas were already, in terms of entrepreneurship, for instance, Latinas were already leading the growth in new enterprises, new businesses, small and medium businesses, even surpassing owned businesses. So that is a testament to the potential and the growth of the Hispanic community in all areas of society, in all social indicators. Latinos have been moving forward. It's been an incremental progress. It hasn't happened overnight, obviously, but I think we're getting to a point where Latinos are leaving their mark in all aspects of society, whether it's consumers, as workers, as obviously part of the workforce, both immigrants and U.S. born. I think it's a testament to our power and the fact that yes, more needs to be done. And yes, a lot of Hispanics are, hoping that the Biden administration will fulfill its promises to this community, because after all, Biden won the presidency in large part because of the support of Hispanic voters. So he's indebted to our community. And what I hear from experts all the time is that, yes, there's hope that with his policies, with the right kinds of policies and progressive policies, Latinos will get further ahead this year. And granted, yes, the first thing is economic recovery, which can't happen until we get herd immunity because of this pandemic.
Thank you, Maria. Very interesting point. I see the same. I think that the Latino community really now feels more empowered, and I am sure that this administration will help all of us. And also, I think that like you said, the Latinos help a lot to have this change in government. Francisco, you have something to share with us on this topic? Did we lose Francisco? I don't think so. Francisco, are you there?
Yes, I was having a little technical difficulty. First of all, thank you for including me in today's webinar. It's a pleasure to be with you and this distinguished panel. In very agreement of both Maria and Rosana on the points they made, and I would start with COVID. COVID has affected the Latino community. Latinos likely to contract COVID than their white counterparts. In California, for example, 1.1 million Latinos have contracted COVID.
I think that we lost Francisco again. So sorry. Okay, and I am very curious to know your thoughts about the possible immigration reform. What do you think that Biden administration, do you think that really he will push on the immigration reform? Because it could be really, really important for the community.
Remember that Biden ran on many promises to the Hispanic community, and one of the big promises is immigration reform. It's an issue that has eluded Congress for decades. I've been covering immigration throughout my career as a journalist, and we've seen some small achievements, but not the big enchilada, of course. Immigration reform, we have 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country that have been waiting for decades to get legalized. Many of them have US-born children. It's an issue that needs to be resolved once and for all. But unfortunately, there hasn't been, in my view, there hasn't been enough political will to get it done. Obviously, both parties agree that the immigration system is broken, and you keep hearing phrase, well, exactly what does that mean? It means that it takes many years for families to get reunited through family reunification visas, for instance. It means that businesses don't have enough manpower for their operations because there's a backlog in terms of temporary visas. It means that basically the immigration system is not meeting the demands from labor. So everybody agrees that it needs to be fixed. They just can't get it together in terms of how to get it fixed. I remember in 2013, we came very, very close to getting it done. The Senate passed a huge immigration reform bill in a bipartisan fashion. And then when it moved to the House, then Speaker of the House, John Boehner, decided he wasn't even going to bring it up for debate. No amendments, nothing. So it got shelved. It died in that Congress, and it was never heard of again. There have been many attempts to try to do a piecemeal effort. Those efforts have failed as well. So now there's a new push because Biden promised immigration reform. And what he did in his first day in office was to start signing executive orders to basically dismantle the immigration policy from the previous administration. And so here we are, we have dreamers waiting to get legalized. We have TPS holders waiting to get legalized. Just last week, Biden authorized TPS for Venezuelans. So my guess is that right now, the Biden administration, of course, is focused on the vaccination effort, fighting the pandemic, spurring economic recovery. And then, of course, immigration reform is a big chunk of his policy now. I want to be optimistic. I remain hopeful. But if I had a crystal ball, I would say that it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting and it's going to take a lot of political capital. I'm not sure that Biden, in the political climate that we're facing right now in Washington, I'm not very sure that he's going to have enough political capital to push it through, to see it through. A lot of us who've been covering immigration are hopeful that we will one day finally be able to write a story that says Congress, passed this immigration reform bill. I remain optimistic, but I think it's a tough fight. It's a tough climb. I don't know that it's going to get done this year, at least. We'll have to see. It's a work in progress.
I would add, Beatrice, one element. I think that was a wonderful description, which is the foreign policy piece of the immigration agenda. I think, while showing a much more humane approach, and we'll see, as Maria points out, whether it can be achieved through Congress to immigrants already in the United States, there's a real sense to address the challenges in Northern Central America in particular that are driving so many families to leave their homes and communities and come to the United States. And I think there, the commitment has been very consistent, both during the campaign and now a pledge to spend $4 billion over 4 years in the Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala to try to address what are known as the root causes of migration, which is a technical term for real human suffering, including impacts of climate, 2 hurricanes last November that cost 500,000 acres of farmland and raised poverty to over 8 million people. In Northern Central America, high levels of violence and insecurity and, low levels of economic opportunity. So I think just that component of the immigration plan doesn't get as much attention, I think is really critical because, again, it shows the big-heartedness of this new approach, notwithstanding a lot of the political challenges that Maria laid out.
And Benjamin, the other important aspect to that multi-pronged strategy that the Biden administration wants to put in place, and this happened just recently, it wants to emphasize the issue of accountability. Because the point is, most people will agree, you don't leave your homeland. You don't leave what you've known all your life, your family, your jobs, your friends, for an uncertain future, right? And all the risk involved in trying to cross over illegally. Accountability has to be a big element because if those governments are not providing those opportunities and they're not, stamping down on violence and gang violence and so forth, people are going to continue to flee. It doesn't matter how much money you spend on a public awareness campaign, detailing the dangers of crossing illegally. It just falls on deaf ears because people are desperate. And desperation calls for desperate measures. If you tell them, hey, stay home, it's dangerous, people are not going to listen to those messages because there's a greater need to try a new approach. So that's why you see this phenomenon of the caravans, people will still try to cross over illegally because that's a better, in their mind, they have a better shot of getting through that way than to have to wait in line for 10 years to get reunited with their loved ones in the US. So yes, economic development, accountability, those are issues that need to be part of the strategy. We'll see if the Biden plan actually produces those results, because the idea is people shouldn't have to leave their countries if they had those opportunities back home.
I mean, I like that a few things. For the most part, I agree with what our panelists are saying in terms of immigration being, for the most part, a last resort. We did see the caravans during the Trump administration. What was the reason why these caravans were in grand masses coming to the U.S. at that particular moment? I also have some feelings about that, why those reasons may have been or not. But at the end of the day, we had droves of people coming into the border, which forced a heavy hand that coupled with the crisis of the pandemic we're seeing right now. While most of us Latinos would like to see, as Maria describes, a whole enchilada, the last time we saw a partial enchilada, or the whole at the time, was 1986 during, the Reagan administration. This whole enchilada would have to rehappen or get over and over done every 20, 30 years, because immigration is not going to stop. It's a reality, particularly from our countries, from Latin American countries. First, because of the geographical proximity, and second of all, because the crisis that Benjamin describes is being seen in Central America, but also in Mexico and other Caribbean countries. We're seeing a flow of Cubans coming in through Mexico. We're seeing Haitians coming in through Mexico. It's a different border town. It's not necessarily Central America and Mexicans as we tend to see. So going back to the issue of the whole or the partial enchilada, the first thing that Biden needs to do, and he has taken steps in this direction, is first of all, revert some of the hardcore policies that were established during the Trump administration. So the first step was to open the border for those that were, through an agreement with the Mexican government, that both presidents agreed that people that had asked for political asylum were to remain in Mexico. That has opened it, but it's brought in a small group of people. Within that environment, I've been covering immigration for many years, as Rosanna has, and most journalists have. We have seen a different perspective now. So what we see in the border now is a lot of people that would like to apply for political asylum. They've been stranding in that border, and we had reporters there on the border saying, we would like to apply for that. They're remaining in the border. The situation in the border right now is critical. And if we just have a little bit of memory, the accident that occurred last week in California, in Holtville, that car accident, that a car that had 27 immigrants, an SUV that had 27 immigrants, that is a unfortunate accident, is merely a reflection of the volume of people that are coming through that porous wall that was supposed to be beautiful and grand. That wall was made open, and people were coming in. We're still continuing to see that. So what we're going to see right now is an effort of Biden reversing some of those very hardcore things that were established during the administration, coupled with the issue of COVID. So it's not only the situation with the people coming in for political asylum, but it's also people and visas. For example, student visas were canceled during the Trump administration. Those have to be reverted back to what they were before. The lottery visa, where a lot of countries had specific limits. Biden has discussed this, and he's put something in writing already that these visas are going to be expanded. The growth could be, between 50 and 60% more in specific countries, particularly Mexico. So that visa lottery would have to change, so you would have more opportunities for some people. The other thing that had stopped was the opportunities for people to come and work for specific high-tech or high-level companies. Trump argued, his administration argued, that this would take away from American jobs. Private companies would say no. These particular jobs are perfect for foreigners because they're well qualified, and it will only enhance and allow the business to grow, regardless of where their talent is coming from. Biden is in the process of working with that as well. So in essence, and in a quick synopsis, before we get there, before we get the partial or the bigger enchilada, we have to work on small progress to revert some of the things that have happened in the prior administration. Interestingly enough, in 4 years, a lot changed negatively, coupled with the COVID crisis, to immigration. Now, you start small, and slowly, I think the political environment will open up a little bit more, and hopefully we'll see something a little bit larger. That's my perspective.
Beatrice, I'd like to jump in. Good morning, everybody. It's a wonderful honor to be here with all of you. I think we need to look at immigration reform as having two pieces, okay? One piece has to do with the persons who are here already, okay? The other piece has to do with the persons who want to come in. And I think both political parties have a problem here because both political parties have a piece of their immigration policy that is incoherent. So the Republicans' incoherent piece is the fact that they really don't want to come face to face with the need to provide a legal status to the persons who are here already. And I mean, they do agree, for example, on the Dreamers, and they do agree on a number of other groups, but they really have to come to terms with the fact that those persons who've been here for many, many years, we're not going to ask them to return. Okay, that's their incoherence. The Democratic Party, however, also has a big incoherent problem with immigration, and that has to do with people coming in, the people who want to come in. Because if you heard all the candidates at the Democratic primary, they were basically, nobody could bring themselves to saying, we cannot have open borders. We have to have some limits. I mean, everybody, not just from Latin America, everybody from around the world would like to come to the United States. I'd say hundreds of millions of people would like to come to the United States. And the American people do not want open borders. They want border security, and they want to permit some persons to come in, but have some limits so that other persons don't get to come in. And the Democratic Party on this bill that just came up in the House has really not provided any answers on how we have both a humane immigration policy that also has limits and that doesn't just allow large numbers of people to come in, which, by the way, eventually will lead to a backlash. This is one of the sad things, that one of the ways to build a political consensus in this society for immigration reform is to have a combination of a well thought out immigration policy where we do allow persons to come in, also with border security and policies that limit people that we don't want to come here or that we don't think we can prioritize over others who we would like to welcome here. So, and then the other tension that I think President Biden is going to find is that to manage immigration to the United States, he's going to have to develop a very good relationship with President Lopez Obrador of Mexico, okay? And part of the problem is that there are people on the Biden team, on the Biden foreign policy team, at the State Department level particularly, who are big, human rights advocates that don't like President Lopez Obrador. They see President Lopez Obrador as having some authoritarian tendencies and somebody that we should be more strict towards than Donald Trump was. I mean, this is one of the paradoxes of politics, which is that Trump and Lopez Obrador got along very well. They developed a very good working relationship. And I think President Biden could do that with President Lopez Obrador. But there are people on his team that are going to try to push him to be more didactic towards Mexico and its various human rights shortcomings. That is not going to sit well with President Lopez Obrador. So that's going to be an issue. And then finally, what Ruben pointed out is key. I mean, that we do need to have some kind of a program to help nations like El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras in particular that are facing major crises. I don't think $4 billion is going to do it, okay? I mean, these are major problems. Resources alone are not going to be enough. You're talking about institutional reform. You're talking about massive corruption. You're talking about governments where drug trafficking groups have a lot of hold on the judiciary, on law enforcement, on the gangs. So I would suggest that it's going to take not just $4 billion, it's going to take more money, but also a comprehensive approach in which not just the United States, but we turn to some of our European allies and the Canadians and say, hey, let's try to put together a comprehensive framework for assisting the Central American countries. And that's going to take several years. And in the meantime, of course, many persons in those countries will want to come here. Some for human rights reasons, some will ask for asylum, but others, they will want to migrate for the same reason that Nigerians, Guineans, Argentines, Cubans want to come to the United States, which is because they want to have good jobs and a good life for their families. So how to manage all these is going to be very, very complicated. And it's going to take creating some kind of a political consensus. And that's the challenge.
Actually, I want to push back on something Alberto said, which is, I've been covering immigration for decades, and it's a narrative that Democrats are open borders. I want to push back on that narrative. That's a conservative talking point, and it's false. Because when you look at the history of immigration enforcement, guess who began the crackdown on immigration at the border? It was the Clinton administration, shutting down the tunnels to fight back on drug traffickers. So this whole idea of either or, Republicans are for border enforcement and Democrats are for open borders is false. It's a false narrative, and it influences the way Americans perceive the issue of illegal immigration and how to solve it. Every major immigration reform bill that I have seen and that I have covered had tough border enforcement measures, more money for border agents, obviously more money for immigration judges as well to fight back the huge backlog in immigration courts. So it has a lot of moving pieces and a lot of components. So there's a big chunk of money, boatloads of money for border enforcement. So the idea that Democrats are open borders is false. I mean, even Schumer will tell you, yes, everybody needs to agree on what is controlling future immigration flows going to look like. Obviously, there needs to be tighter controls in the asylum process, because unfortunately, already there's a high threshold for applying for asylum. You can't just show up at the border and say, I'm being persecuted. You have to show credible fear. You have to have proof that your life is in danger if you're deported back to your home country. So there are a lot of steps. It's already a tough process to begin with. And I remember Jeff Sessions, when he was Attorney General, at one point he said, well, poverty is not a reason for political asylum. And I think both parties agree on that. But guess what? A lot of people with legitimate asylum cases were turned away with the Migration Protocol Program, the Quédate en México, Remain in Mexico program. More than 60,000 political asylum applicants were turned away and sent back to Mexico to wait at the border for their immigration court hearings. And
Maria,
of course,
try to simplify. We need to
Yes.
move. We have a lot of questions.
What I'm saying is, yes, I think we all agree here that immigration reform is going to take a big push, but I think a big element of that, convincing the American public of the need for that immigration reform, has to be in being truthful and just, being truthful about the narrative of what's pushing illegal immigration to this country.
Okay, we can move on. This is a very hot topic, and all our emotion, our histories are involved, of course, and our experience. So we go to the third question, that is, what do you think will be the relationship between the White House and Latin America?
I'd be happy to offer just some brief insights. I think the relationship would be much deeper and much more diverse in terms of the themes. Under the last administration, there was very little engagement in Latin America outside this question of migration, which we just discussed, with the Northern Triangle countries and with Mexico. Other than that, there was a very hard line on Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, and then basically no policy toward the rest of the region, including the major, South American economies of Argentina, Brazil, and Colombia. I think what you're going to see now is just a lot more interest. This is the President of the United States for the first time ever with a deep personal history, both from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and from his time as 8 years as Vice President, traveling, dozen times to the region or more, very involved in the peace process in Colombia, for example, close relationships with the Brazilians. So I think what you'll find is an effort to engage across the board, most importantly on pandemic response and on the restoration of economic activity. As all of you know, Latin America was the hardest hit region in the world when it comes to COVID-19. On economic matters, a 10% reduction in economic activity across the region, and also in terms of the numbers of cases and deaths, very disproportionate to the percent of the global population. And so I think it's a region that very much needs U.S. engagement, and in my view, would welcome it even after a period of quite strained interhemispheric dynamics. And I think you'll see that. You've seen that already. There was this assumption, and I'll end here, that the U.S. would be ignoring foreign policy in general, and specifically Latin America, because of all of the challenges the U.S. faces domestically and in foreign policy issues, such as the Iran nuclear deal. I don't believe that's the case, and I don't see evidence of that already. I think the temporary protected status for Venezuelans has shown that that's on the radar. The migration challenges at the border show you cannot ignore Central America. And I think even more broadly, the United States will host the Summit of the Americas, either this year or if it's delayed slightly next year, and that will really bring to the forefront the U.S. foreign policy agenda for Latin America.
I think that President Biden's challenges in Latin America are going to be quite severe. And, Ruben, of course, brought up the issue of COVID. Latin American economic growth rates have plummeted, a major collapse in GDP all across the region. And these countries are going to take quite a while to recover from the economic impact of COVID. That economic impact at the same time is going to bring a lot of political and economic instability. And some of those consequences may be adverse to what the United States is trying to do in the region, which is to promote the rule of law and governments that are democratically accountable. So, for example, we don't know who's going to win the election in Ecuador this year. And it may be that we get a successor to Rafael Correa. That would not be good from the viewpoint of the growth of rule of law and more stable prosperity long-term for Ecuador. So, and you see the problems facing Brazil right now with Lula wanting to come back into the fray, Lula versus Bolsonaro, a great deal of polarization going on in Brazil, which happens to be, of course, the 11th largest economy in the world. And then finally, one issue that the Biden team will face is this whole soft power competition with China. China is making great soft power inroads into the region, unlike 30, 20 years ago. And the United States needs to have a coherent policy to deal with that. And I suggest one way to do it would be to have the kind of funding for the Export-Import Bank and to create and strengthen institutions that allow the United States to loan money for various infrastructure projects in Latin America that will give American companies a foothold, and as well as other companies from allied countries, and help to reduce the soft power impact of China. Again, this is a long-term project, but we have to be very conscious about that. China, for example, right now is making a big play for soft power vaccines, okay? And offering vaccines to Latin American countries in the future. We should do that as well, and we should do it at even better terms than the Chinese. It's going to take some resources to do, but some small resources developed in a strategic way can make a big difference. And then, finally, there's the issue of Venezuela, okay? And we talk about Venezuela because there are 4 million Venezuelan people who've left their country. And President Maduro doesn't want to go. And of course, we're not going to, and we should not think about forcing him from power through military means. So the question is, how do you handle that situation? How do you manage that situation? Allies will, can put some pressure on Venezuela, but in the end, we have a very skilled political operator who also happens to be very incompetent. President Maduro, as far as managing his country's economy, and that has had already a huge impact throughout the region. So I think that these are major challenges. And as I said, I think ultimately long-term soft power competition with China will be one issue that we want to start handling in a very responsible and forward-looking way. There's no need for the United States to be as absent from the region as it has been now, pretty much actually for the past decade. It didn't start with Trump. We were already seeing this in the aftermath of the global financial crisis during the Obama years, that the United States was just not as present there as it should have been. So we need to get back and do it in a creative, positive way, and extend our hand of friendship to all countries in the region, including some with governments that we may not necessarily like. For example, there's the government of Bolivia. It's a new government. It's a left-wing government, but we should work with them, and we should offer them our goodwill, and we also should not emphasize so much the drug issue. We should not have a foreign policy driven by migration and drugs. It should be much broader agenda, driven by simple mutual interest in a peaceful hemisphere that is making a political and economic progress.
I want to add just briefly to what Alberto just said. I think another area we not miss in this conversation is, what is the Biden policy going to look like towards Cuba? Obviously, the U.S. government has always been committed and concerned about the human rights in Cuba. Last week, the White House said that a Cuba shift is not necessarily a top priority at this point in the Biden administration, although they are continue to express concern about human rights. Biden committed to lifting restrictions on remittances, for instance. So one thing that I would be curious to see down the road is whether or not Biden is going to revert to the Obama policies, where there was a new thaw in the U.S.-Cuba relations. Remember, Obama made a historic trip to Cuba in 2016, I believe, the first U.S. president in many decades. So we'll have to keep an eye out on what Biden is going to do towards Cuba. For now, I think the immediate goal would be to lift restrictions on remittances. Remember that Trump, before he left office, included Cuba in the list of state sponsors of terrorism. So yeah, that's one thing, the one area that I would advise all of us to keep an eye out on, and see whether or not we'll see a new thaw in U.S.-Cuba relations.
So
Just
I want to move on to the
Maria
next
said,
question. We need to move on. We need to move on, because if not, we will be 3 hours.
Yeah, one minor point.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, everything you said is quite true. That there's going to be an effort to relax remittances and travel, but President Biden is going to be stymied by a very powerful political ally of his, who's Senator Menendez. He's the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he's very much of a proponent of a hardline policy towards Cuba. So that's going to be a break on any efforts to open the policy maybe as quickly as he would like to.
Okay,
So
Rosanna?
I will take us to the next question, but I did want to add to everything that Alberto said, that I think it's really important. First of all of these issues are so deep and so not discussed that, you can tell there's a lot of passion around them. But I think for a panel of kind of this distinguished panel, it's really important that we also weigh in. And I think that the most important thing about the relationship between the White House and Latin America is that it must be influenced by the Latinos in this country. It must be influenced by the diaspora. It must be influenced by people who are from those countries, and that's different. So on the question of Kamala Harris and the situation, the status of women in this country, it's obvious that it's a big accomplishment for this country that we have a woman in the White House. Although she's the vice president, I would argue that we could have had a woman president a while back. And so women in this country are still battling the same, issues. Even though we've made progress when we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, we still, don't have a woman president. We still have women's issues as kind of the side bucket of issues on a platform. When this is a country that should strive, right, for equity for women in the workplace, in pay equity, women in the way that all of these economic policies affect women acutely, because they are often the ones responsible for children. And so, yes, I believe that Kamala Harris, as the first female VP, can impact the empowerment of women, but that does not give President Biden a pass, right? That they, as an administration, has to be committed to elevating the status of women in this country, and that is from young girls, in schools, from access to education, Title IX, and all the traditional things, in addition to a purposeful hiring of women at the highest levels of government and corporations, and making corporations accountable for what they say they're going to do in terms of equity and diversity. And so I'll stop there, since
Yeah,
I want to put as many comments in as possible.
Yeah, we are so happy that we have a vice president that is a woman. I think I, for example, experienced a leadership in my own country for a female. And I think that women, when we have these high positions, we need to lead with the skill that usually we assign to women. So to lead from our female part, to try to find consensus, to try to be generous, to try to be empathic, and not all women lead from that side. So I am very hopeful and confident that Kamala Harris will put this skill, her female skills, to work for a better US. It's not only that a woman arrives to the position, it's how they lead as women.
I think it's important to note that one of the big headlines, for me at least, in covering the elections last year, is the amount of women that ran for office at all levels of government. There were 490 women running for office last year for different positions, and now we have 144 women in Congress, including 52 women of color. Another statistic, 27% of all lawmakers are now women, compared to 24% in 2019. So there's steady progress. I think part of the enthusiasm was, of course, Biden choosing Kamala Harris as VP running mate, not only because of her being of Asian descent and also immigrant descent, and also African American. So she checked off all those boxes. And I think it got a lot of people excited about the possibility that more women can run for office in the US. I think a lot of people wonder, the US being the richest industrialized nation in the world, you see third world countries that have already made history by electing a woman president. And it seems like we are not there yet. But I want to be hopeful that we are going to get to that place. I think Hillary Clinton really broke some of that glass ceiling, right? It's not totally broken yet, but she really led the way, so that now more women will be emboldened and encouraged to run. And, hopefully in our lifetime, we'll see a woman president. But we've come a long way.
Yeah, and we are happy for that. So, Ruben, I would like to ask you a question. If today Biden calls you, what do you suggest to him how he can make his administration to increase its outreach to the Latino community? What suggestion do you have for the new administration about that?
Biden has to find partners. He has to find a buy-in from many different people and many different communities. We have different organizations in different states, different cities that have been very successful in reaching out people at the grassroots. I'm going to draw a little analogy here of something that's happening with COVID, because it's something that we're all going through, and it's a reality here. In California, we've had a real issue trying to reach underserved communities in terms of getting people vaccinated, and even dating back to the time when we were doing active testing. As you know, California is a state that's been most hardly hit in this pandemic, and Los Angeles has been the city, 1/3 or almost a little over 1/3 of all the cases in the state of California come out of Los Angeles County. And this started with heavy testing, and then now the situation. What has the government done? They've dedicated 40% of all vaccines to go to these underserved communities. And to get to these people, they've utilized local hardcore organizations and informal sectors to get to these communities. And I'm not talking about the typical, activist type of people. I'm talking about people like promotoras. There's programs of promotoras de salud throughout the country. And these are mainly women that reach out to these communities on a very granular level. And there are some historic figures that play a huge role in this. Just yesterday, we did a huge story commemorating the month of empowering women with Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta is still a driving force. So you can reach some people that historically have been very involved, particularly women, and then reach very granular efforts into these promotora environments to reach out to them and try in that way to expand, the knowledge. Why? Because these people know where the people that are underserved are, where those Latinos are that really need the attention of the government. Because one way or the other, we have a voice. Ourselves. Latinos don't have a huge voice in the country, but we're able to speak. We're able to find out what the issues are. We know where to go. But most of our people don't know where to go. These organizations can help that process. And I think we also, as journalists, have a huge role in this. And that's why I believe Spanish language news has been growing since the beginning, because there's a huge need. And our focus in news, especially the people I've worked with, have a consistent message of serving a community. The role of news for Hispanic media has historically been, we are here to serve a community. And if you look, and I look at it, I work in a duopoly. We have a Telemundo and an NBC environment. The news we cover, although we're in the same town, is very different. Our focus, Telemundo's focus, is service. We're here to service the community. So we inform, but we serve. When I worked at La Opinión, it was inform and serve. When I worked in Puerto Rico, it was inform and serve. If you work in that process and you utilize the platform that you've been given to disperse this information, reach out to people on a very granular level. And I think the Biden administration, to round things up, round the argument up, is he needs to reach out to these folks and say, hey, we need to partner on this. We need to reach the Latino community, and at a level they'll understand, they'll appreciate, and they'll get benefit from.
I think he also needs to follow the same model. He has a very good relationship with the African American community, and he shows them a lot of love. And I think that he needs to show the same amount of love for the Latino community. He knows how to do it. We're in the same neighborhoods. We're in the same top cities in the country. And so I just think he needs to do it.
Yeah, and do you think, Rosanna, that perhaps the American African community, they have more engagement with these things because they are more engaged with each other? What I don't see from the Latino community in the US is that sometimes we are not working together. We have some organizations, but we don't have a big sense of community that I see in the African American community.
Well, because you see them differently, right? I don't agree with that. I really don't agree with that assessment, because we are from different cities. Ruben is in LA. I'm in New York. We're from different geographies. We're not always in agreement on everything. We come from 20 countries, and including, the Caribbean. So there's always this pressure on Latinos to all agree and move in the same direction. And we just don't function that way. We have, 21 countries plus the diaspora. So that kind of tension around if we all moved in the same direction, we would be better off. I push that back. I would push back on that and say, we are who we are. And we vote, and we have economic power, which is why Telemundo is in business, right? We have buying power, we have critical mass, we symbolize the fastest growing segment of the population in the next 30 years, and there's empirical data, right, to back that up. And so we don't have to act like anyone else. We have to be who we are, and they should come to us. That's my position.
I think, and I would agree with Rosanna because we have 60 million Hispanics. We're larger than the population of Spain. And when you see the exit polls from last year, when you see the surveys, what drives us together are the needs for our community. What are we concerned about besides immigration? Economic prosperity, educational attainment, college retention levels, increasing those, health, addressing health disparities, all of those social indicators where there's a lot of room for improvement. So those issues bring us together. Now, whether you're working with Unidos US or some of the other community-based organizations, I think they're all pulling together in the sense that these are the issues on the Latino agenda. This is what we want, and this is how we think we're going to get it. We're going to get it through more political empowerment, which is why it's so important to make sure that every cycle, every election cycle, communities come together and register more Hispanics, get them to vote, convince them that they have a stake in this country, and that the way to make their voices heard is to vote. It doesn't help anybody if you're just complaining about how the government is failing. You have to be a part of it too. So they need to feel that they have a stake in this, to get them to the polls, to get them to vote for people who will represent their needs and their wants. Because I think ultimately what makes us part of the American fabric is that we want what everyone else wants, prosperity and just having more opportunities. That's why we're all sitting here today. I'm an immigrant. If my mother hadn't made the sacrifices that she did, who knows what would have happened to me if I had stayed in Nicaragua, right? So I think we need to keep in mind that there are a lot more issues that unite us than separate us, whether you're Puerto Rican or Central American or Mexican. So we need to be mindful of that.
I just want to add a quick thing, Beatriz, if I may. One of the things that Naleo argues is that there's a large number of Latinos, I don't have the numbers with me right now, that are eligible to vote and they're not voting. So while there's many people that cannot vote, either because they're undocumented or because
32 million.
I'm sorry?
32 million eligible to vote, and not even half of us make it to the polls.
So one of the things, so you've got the folks that just can't vote because they're undocumented, or those that have green cards that can't vote. But then there's that group that Maria's speaking about. Naleo describes it as a great unengaged. Why aren't those millions of people not going to the polls? That's an incredible handicap that we as Latinos have that needs to change. So what role do we, because we in a way are leaders in these communities, what do we need to do to get these folks engaged for them to vote? And as Rosanna says, not everybody's going to vote in the same direction. We're not, a homogeneic community. We're very different, and it was evidence in the last election. Look what happened in Florida. Look what happened in Texas. Look what happened in California. Look what happened in New York. Rosanna can tell us details of what happened in New York and the vote. It's very interesting. But what's interesting is what is happening to those folks that aren't voting. Why are they so disengaged from the political process?
But Ruben, I've got good news for you, and I think this is going to bring a smile to your face. There is cause to be optimistic. 32 million eligible. Yes, we have a long way to go to make sure that all of us get to that point where we vote. But there's steady progress. You saw the huge voter registration drives by many Latino organizations last year. Let me give you an example. This is an NBC News exit polling data from last year. So 13% of those who voted did it for the first time. Talking about Latino voters, 13% of those who voted for the first time. and compared to under 10% in 2016. And then 1 in 10 of the new voters were between 18 and 24 years old. What does that tell you? It tells you that more young Hispanics, US-born Hispanics, are driving this new voter registration and empowerment and just being involved. Because again, like we said earlier, if you feel that you have a stake in the society, you're going to want to be part of the political process. And I think we are making progress. It's slow, it's frustrating at times, but I think what I see on the ground from all the community organizations is that, yes, they're making that significant progress.
Yeah, thank you. We need to move on to the next one. So, how should the Latino community engage with the administration in a positive way? Ruben?
Well, just like I described, I think it starts from if you work for a private corporation, as I do, is continue to do the good work and do what you have to do to better the name of Latinos in this country, and ask for equity, ask for equality. Right now, the new thing that I see a lot of different companies engaging in is the new position called the Vice President or Senior Vice President of DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. You're starting to see that's happening everywhere now. And if you go into LinkedIn, as we all do, because I've seen all of you there, those positions are there. They're existing. They're existing. And, those are good opportunities for many of us to get out there, to engage, to participate in that. And then you realize that this is a country that is very interested in generating revenue and generating money and seeing the economy grow. Those attract the ears of any politician. So particularly and you can reach out in the Biden administration. The other thing is what Rosanna has done. Rosanna is now a high-level, government official in a huge state, in the state of New York. Those are great opportunities for us to have access to the high levels of government. And I have a lot of admiration for her, and not because she knows this, but it really means a lot that as a woman and as a Latina, she's able to reach these places and be able to reach the administration in places like, look, we don't want handouts. We're hardworking people. We do what we do, and I think that is the best way to reach to the Biden administration, and to reach any administration for that matter, to say, look, we're here to stay. We're productive citizens. We represent a lot of money. We represent private organizations. We represent the government, and we're a force to be reckoned with. We are not just asking for handouts. We're here to work. We're here to show and support the economy, and you ought to listen to us. And this is part of the people here. Now, he also has to listen to the Latinos that live outside of this country and realize that whatever happens in the hemisphere affects the way that this country moves forward. And if he has the ears to listen to that, and those experts can speak to that effort, I think he'd be in bad shape if he didn't listen. So
I would just add, also reframing Latin America as an area of opportunity for the United States, which it has long been seen, but in recent years is only viewed through the prism of crisis, particularly the prism of migration. When in reality, that the large and diverse communities, the economic links to the United States, the extraordinary natural resources are all opportunities for the United States to engage in a positive agenda. And I think that's what the Biden administration is seeking to do. Just one of 1,000 examples you could give is the renewable energy possibilities in places like Chile and Argentina and Brazil, where the Biden administration's climate agenda very much has allies in Latin America who have already stepped up and said they're willing to be partners. That's, again, one of 1,000 examples you could give of where this region could be a real partner for the United States and advance, national interests.
Yes. I would like to move to the last question and then to open to questions from the public. The last question would be, what do you see as impediment to more constructive involvement between the government and the Latino community? Any answer? What are the impediments that,
I wouldn't necessarily label it as an impediment. I think it's more, like Ruben was saying, finding those spaces where Latinos need to be at the table, whether it's climate change, immigration reform, economic development, all of those issues that impact Latinos just as much or perhaps even more than other segments of society. So I think it's just basically seeking those spaces where you make sure that you're at the table, whether, if, say, for instance, if the Biden administration announces a new policy and is welcoming comments from the public, well, make sure that those community organizations encourage Latinos to get involved in the dialogue, write letters, do like the typical American thing, which is, writing letters to your lawmakers, to your representatives, making sure that you're politically involved. Because if you're not at the table, your voice is not going to count. So I think it's more about seeking those opportunities, showing them our numbers. Look at how much economic empowerment we have. The purchasing power for Latinos has increased. How vital we are in the workforce. And so forth, provide those numbers. Those numbers tell stories, and you need to show them and keep reminding them. We are the largest minority in the country right now, surpassing even African Americans. And so we have a voice. We need to be at that table, seeking those opportunities. Hey, empujar, you're not inviting me, but I'm here and I'm going to sit at the table and be part of that conversation.
I think, and not to be provocative, but I think Ben alluded to this, that one of the impediments is this unresolved immigration issue, right? That immigration takes up so much space when we're speaking about policy in the Latino community, that it's as if that is our only issue. It's an important issue and it needs to be resolved. I mean, we've been in this movie for, I want to say over a dozen years, and we lost ground, even in the Obama era. But, I always say to people, well, immigration was never a problem in my world. I was in Spanish language media, so they were my audience. I know what they do. I know what they eat. I know where they work. That was never an issue, right? We have but that issue takes up so much space and then divides people up along all of the issues that have been discussed today, that it doesn't provide a lens into the business sector, how we drive, how women-owned businesses in the Latino, Latinas own all, kind of start all the new businesses in the country at a disproportionate rate. How we drive industries, how we drive the sports industry, how we drive the music and industry, how we as constituents and as producers of these things are a driving force in these major American industries. There is no lens into that because we're constantly talking about immigration and Cuba. And I think to the extent that we can really make progress in immigration, we can also be part of telling these narratives of success that everybody on this screen knows. But that most of the country doesn't. If Hurricane Maria had not hit Puerto Rico, most Americans would still not understand the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico, the status of Puerto Rico and why it's treated in the way that it's treated, in a very negative way, the way it's treated by this country, and what it is, what a Commonwealth is, and why that's so important. And so, similarly, most Americans who are educated in the United States, as I am, born and raised here, educated here, have no idea what goes on below Mexico. I could not fill out that map, right? I teach at John Jay College here in the city, and I can tell you they cannot fill out the map of Latin America, except for maybe on occasion Brazil. So I think that one of the impediments is that we haven't had time to push that to the side to really educate Americans about what this contingent is, right? Who we are, how we got here, and then all the amazing contributions that we've made to this country and to the hemisphere. I always resist from saying Americans because, most of our families have been Americans, no matter where they came from, right? And when I was at El Diario, people would say that there's no word in English for estadounidense, porque de esa manera se han apropiado de la palabra. Entonces you can't say someone who is just from the United States. You say American as if America does not include the whole
continent.
And that's part of the the behavior, right? And the attitude that we have dealt with as a community. And so since we're always dealing with the tyranny of the urgent, we don't get to what is important. And for me, what is important is that we have an amazing track record that goes back 100 years of contributions that Latino immigrants, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican have made to this country. And there's no space for us to tell those stories. And I would argue that
I want to second what you said, and I actually want to take it a step further. I think what you're saying speaks to some of the failings of our education system. And what I mean by that is that Hispanics have been in this country before it was founded as a country. We got to remember that Hispanics were already fighting along the side of people, in the Revolutionary War. We settled here before the European settlers were here. So I think it's a failing of the American education system where most Americans don't know that Hispanics have been here forever, since the foundation of this country. And I think it's up to us, but it's also, pressuring the government to make sure that those stories get included. Because I bet you we don't have the space for it now in this program, but I can rattle off a lot of Hispanics that have contributed to this country before it even was a country. So, it speaks to how we have continued to be underrepresented and our stories haven't been told, or at least not told in the way that it needs to be told.
Yeah, I remember
it's not in the curriculum, and I think that's a big part of it. I mean, we now have, a Puerto Rican Secretary of Education. We as a contingent, a whole contingent of Americans are now present in the education of children in this country. And so you come to it, by the time you come to, if you want to concentrate or you want to take a course in college, you might take a course on Mexican policy, you might take a course on Latin America, which is always hard to tell where that is, And so I would also say that there is a purposeful kind of erasure of our contributions, which then puts us on the defensive about who we are and that we're asking for these things. I mean, we've been in this country for a long time, and in terms of Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, we go back so many generations, right? That we should not be fighting the same battles. And so I really see us in this Biden administration as more fed up than ever. Like, this is not, let's just be nice. This is like, we can swing the power of our community around, even if only 10% vote. Because we have the economic purchasing power, we have the potential, and we have the most citizens under 30 in this country, by far.
Yeah, when I moved from Buenos Aires to Chicago, I was amazed. I started to work in the Department of Labor as a division manager. And the questions, when I say, I am American, but not from North America, I am Argentinian. And a lot of them, they asked me if I spoke Portuguese. So I couldn't believe. I say, okay, this is the map. Many times, so I put a Mapamundi there, and I say, here is Argentina, because the people, they have the perception also that Hispanic, a lot of them, they are all only Mexican and Puerto Rican, no more. They don't know, like Rosanna said, I have my son is in a school here, and I couldn't believe what he studied. I say, you are missing a big part of the war. So I think that is a fail of education also. But I think that we have a big responsibility to educate, to create awareness in our context, with our network, with our coworkers, about who we are, how we contribute. And I think that the best things that we can do is to work, trying to be excellent, try to work with excellence, with empathy, with responsibility. And I think that we can lead with our example and show that Latinas, we are here to work really hard, and that we like to contribute to our country, no? And so I am so thankful that we were a part of this discussion. Alberto, you asked to speak before, no?
Yeah, one of the things that we need to keep in focus is that good public policy is good public policy, and that we're all in this country together. And therefore, what we need to focus on is holding every single administration accountable for good policies, both foreign policy and good domestic policies that make the country more prosperous, more stable, more peaceful, and more innovative as well, and where everybody feels that there's a good place for them. And I think that this is not just a matter of Latinos, it's not a matter of Jewish people, it's not a matter of Africans. It's something that all of us, as members of the United States of America, we are called Americans for that reason. However historically inaccurate that may be, that's how we are known throughout the world. That's how Russia refers to us. That's how the Chinese refers to us. But we have this major enterprise together, 330 million people. And I think that we should not let any government or any political party get away with offering us second-rate public policies just because they pretend to do more for us than the other party. So I think that this is part of the importance of realizing that at the end of the day, we also have a common identity, and which is a wonderful thing, and which makes this country, a very special place. And I think sometimes people talk about how nowadays it's become very fashionable to talk about the United States as a horrible place, as a racist society. But the fact is, many people around the world, hundreds of millions of people, would like to come here. And that's a testament to the fact that in spite of our problems, in spite of the improvements and reforms that we still need, we are a society that is very much worth working very hard to bring us all together. Regardless of where we came from, it's important to emphasize what we do share in common. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So can we open to the questions that we have from the audience? Carlos, can you help us with that? Okay, what can we do to engage the people that can vote but are not engaged in the political process because of the distrust they have of the government due to experience in their countries?
I would just say, just broadly, one thing that would be helpful is not making these unfair comparisons of parts of our political system to governments in places like Venezuela. I think the narrative you heard during the campaign that the Democratic Party is a socialist party and that electing Democrats is akin to bringing to power political forces that are similar to Chavismo in Venezuela. I mean, that sort of distortions are not helpful in engagement of Latino voters, but also in understanding the phenomena in Latin America. So I guess I would say is, when we do in our political discourse talk about Latin American politics, we should be very clear of the types of authoritarian projects that you see in places like Nicaragua now and Venezuela, and distinguish them clearly from policies in the United States that are emphasizing income redistribution, but in a very democratic framework. So one piece of advice for me is making sure you don't alienate voters from either of our political parties by making comparisons that are unfair and distort the realities both in the United States and in Latin America.
I always like to tell people, the late Representative John Lewis, who was very supportive of Dreamers and immigration reform, he used to say, and I don't remember the verbatim quote, but he used to say, it doesn't matter what ship you came in, we're all in the same boat together now. And I think that kind of, in a nutshell, explains why all of us have a stake in making sure that all of us have the same opportunities and that we, reduce the racial inequities that we have in this country. Yes, there's an ugly underbelly to the history of this country with the legacy of racism, but there's also a lot to be hopeful for and a lot to be positive about. The fact that an immigrant kid can dream big and can, make those dreams come true, be an astronaut, be a doctor, be the first in the family to go to college, or even maybe not college or learn a trade. all of those American stories, whether you want to hyphenate the American or not, those are all great American stories, and they're still possible in this country today. So I think when you repeat that message so that people understand, okay, whatever happened in your country, that's in your past. You're here now, and you have a stake, and you have a voice in this process. I think that's a positive message that needs to be put out there constantly by the media, by the educational system, by our representatives at all levels of government, until it drills in, until people really are convinced that they have a stake in this country.
Yeah, and as Alberto said, only the policies that the government implement are so important, and they affect our lives so much. So they need to vote. We need to vote, and we need to move on with hopes for a better future. We can't be stuck with our past and with the frustration that we live in our countries. So I would like to invite you for final thoughts. If you have some comment, I am so thankful to each of you, to the audience that is there. I know that you are very busy, talented people. So thank you so much to help us to support the work that we do in Women Empowerment Network. And the idea is to help Latinas, and this was great. And I would like to thank also Carlos Gonzalez, that is behind the scene helping us with all the technical issues. So we will put on a screen how you can contact him if you need some assistance from him in the future. We will, for sure. And so thank you so much. But I am opening the panel for final thoughts.
So I want to say, first of all, thank you for including me. And I want to, I'm really for being in this panel of extremely, smart and knowledgeable people. I want to say that as we describe all the challenges that we've talked about in the last hour and a half, that we also have to recognize that we've come off, a period of time in our history, the last 4 years, where there was a purposeful intimidation, of our communities, that when we talk about the census, when we talk about immigration, and even when we talk about voter suppression, I think voter suppression is something that people think about with the African American community, and yet many of our communities, many of our Latino communities are right there in those same communities and neighborhoods. So that before we get to, why people don't vote, we understand that there's been a purposeful intimidation of people of color in this country, of poor people in this country, of women. I mean, these are all also American traditions. There is an American tradition of racism in this country, and by tradition, I mean that you can trace it very back to the beginnings of this country, and we're still grappling with that, and we're grappling with that more openly now. And for many people in the Latino community, the issue of race is still a very important issue, not only here, but even back in our own countries. And so all of these things come to inform how we move forward. I have a lot of hope, and I think Latinos are the most hopeful people ever. When we think about the sacrifices that our grandparents and our ancestors made to get here, for many of us, like me and my children who are born and raised here, we carry that identity. We identify with the country and the culture of our grandparents. People say they're Puerto Rican even though they've never been to the island, and so we have tremendous hope. We carry the hope of that generation that came here. We are not a hopeless people. We are nothing if promise and hope. And so I think at this moment in history, we also have been extremely cooperative, and it's time for us to strut. It's time for us to strut our power, our economic power, our political power, and our power over what this country is going to look like in the future. Thank you.
Very good. Great. Another comment?
I want to say that, and echoing what Rosanna said, I think when we look at all the challenges we have had and continue to face as a community, as the largest minority in the country, I think we should think about and reflect on the fact that, by definition, immigrants are fighters, because it takes a lot of grit to uproot yourself and make it in a new country, in your adoptive country. And then, of course, now more Hispanics are U.S. born than are immigrants. And having said that, I think Obama's slogan from 2008, which he borrowed from Cesar Chavez, I think encompasses what we should embrace. You know, si se puede, we can do it. We have it in our history, in our DNA. And I think we just got to keep pushing forward, you know, keep on keeping on. I think we're going to make it. We're already making it. And we're driving the success of the American story.
Yeah, thank you, Maria.
So I just wanted to, first of all, thank you, Beatriz, for inviting me. And also, I'll send a hello to my fellow panelists. Brilliant remarks. Obviously, everybody here is well educated and really knows what they're talking about. And that's nice to see. You know, the one thing I would say is that we need to appreciate and understand that we're going through a very difficult time currently. I mean, this year, when I do the analysis of 2020 and COVID, I still consider that we're entering the 15th month of 2020 because we continue to see effects of the convulsive year that we had. I mean, it started, if we recall, with COVID, but it also moved on to the Black Lives Matter marches. And then, unfortunately, we saw violence on the streets throughout, which was painful to see, and it took away from the message that the Black Lives Matter movement wanted to convey, which is, all lives matter, Black Lives Matter. And then on top of that, we had a turbulent political process, a very difficult election, a very divided country. The mark of red and blue was so clear this year, and then it ended with again the 15th month of 2020 with the invasion of the Capitol, and this has been a complicated year. So as Latinos, I think, and if you're immigrant or if you're not an immigrant but you're still Latino, what we've experienced has been a painful reality for this country. So similar to what I said at the beginning of this chat, I think we need to revert this process. It's not going to be instant. I think it's a time to heal, a time of atonement, a time of understanding for us and also for the people in the government and in power and in businesses. But we are strong, we're resilient, and we have to make sure that people appreciate and know what we bring to the table. We're not asking for handouts. We're contributing to this economy in ways that people need to know. And that's the biggest challenge, is that a lot of people in this country are not aware of the value, the added value that we bring to this country as being here and also as immigrants. So slow but sure progress is what we need to see, and we need to be patient, but we also need to be insistent and persistent in our message.
Beatriz, I just want to add an appreciation for the inclusion of foreign policy toward Latin America in this conversation. I think often we minimize the importance of the Western Hemisphere beyond the narrow set of issues that are important, but not all there is to consider about our neighbors in the Western Hemisphere. And I think it helps. These are so-called interdomestic issues that have a real domestic constituency that can shape U.S. engagement. And when the voices are not exclusively about either migration or U.S. policy toward Cuba, I think it enriches the quality of the policy, and it also incentivizes good policy that really engages an energetic approach to including South America, for example, whether on climate issues, energy issues, and really across the board in human rights and in helping migrants within the region as well. So my appreciation for recognizing the importance of U.S. Latin America policy to the Latin American community in the United States, and making it clear that it serves U.S. economic and national security interests to be engaged in Latin America, particularly at this time of great vulnerability across the region, from Tierra del Fuego all the way north to the U.S. border, as the region struggles with twin public health and economic crises. And, as we talked about earlier very briefly, the idea that this is also a battleground for the great power competition between the United States and China, yet one more motivation for U.S. policymakers to continue the renewed energetic approach to Latin America. So I'm glad it's part of this discussion. I'm glad to see the Biden administration so focused on the region, and I'm glad to see it framed much more broadly than it traditionally is when it comes to what U.S. constituencies are focused on when it comes to our policies throughout this hemisphere. So thank you again, Beatriz.
Thank you. Okay. Alberto, you have a comment? We finish.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for hosting and initiating this whole wonderful webinar. And I'm very grateful for your own example, Beatriz, for creating this amazing organization, Women's Empowerment, and for connecting your deep love for Argentina, for Latin America, and for the United States with your passion also for women's empowerment. So very, very thank you so much for this. And this has been a wonderful program. And I want to follow up on what Benjamin said about foreign policy, because at the end of the day, you know, the United States lives in a very, very big world. We're only 5% of the world's population. And how we manage our foreign policy is a lot more important than I think maybe sometimes most of our fellow Americans realize. And Latin America is always treated as not as important. And partly because, you know, we're always worried about bigger issues. We're worried about the Middle East. We're worried about Asia. We're worried about Europe. And we should worry about those also. But Latin America is a region where there are tremendous opportunities for all kinds of productive economic, political partnerships, security partnerships going forward. And I think that we need to engage the Latino community here in the United States to play a more active role in the future as part of this outreach to Latin America. Our community happens to be one of the best ambassadors for the United States in Latin America, and we should be more creative about how we do that at the level of government. So tremendous opportunities, again, to engage across all kinds of issues with the region and create a better partnership than we have, and much more constructive partnership, and kind of expand very gradually. It may take a century to do this, but expand the community that we already have with Canada and Mexico to include countries in Central America and in South America on trade issues, on energy issues, as Benjamin, security issues, rule of law, so that gradually we create really a strategic community that benefits all of us who live in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I think that we are ready to finish this. And thank you again, really, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.